What's going on, everybody? Thank you for watching another video from me, Sedentary 103. In this very important video, I wanted to talk about gym safety. Now, the other day I witnessed a very unfortunate mishap. Luckily, it didn't happen to me, but it happened to somebody else. And if you don't be careful, it can happen to you. It was back in bicep day, and I was doing my rows, I was in my zone, and in my peripheral, I saw some guy, but I wasn't really paying attention until I heard a big thump. I turned to my right, and I don't know the name of the apparatus, but it's pretty small. There's a little handle on it, and you can adjust it to how high or how low you want it. And based on that, there's like a little hook, and you could put like a straight bar on it. Some guys, they do chest flies on it with both on each end. I don't know the exact name of the piece of equipment. Or you can also put a piece of rope on there and do tricep pull downs. Needless to say, he was trying to adjust it, and I think he didn't lock the little pin, and it landed literally on his forehead. And I turned immediately. Some guy went up to him. Initially, he looked a little dazed. He was going like this. I thought it was minor until he let go of his hand, and there was blood everywhere. A gym member over there and a staff rushed to him. They had to call the ambulance. I think he was okay afterwards because I saw him walking around, but he probably had a big cut, a big piece of gauze on his forehead that I saw, and it's very unfortunate. He's a little older gentleman. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video right now about gym safety. Now, the first piece of advice I want to give to you about gym safety is if you're new to working out and or there's a piece of equipment, either machine assisted or free weights, and you're not too comfortable on how to use it, don't be shy to ask somebody. Now, with the machine assisted weights, there are directions on how to use it, and for the most part, the risk is pretty low, but it can happen, so you have to be very careful. The risk is definitely higher when you do free weights, so make sure you ask somebody. The second piece of advice I want to give you kind of coincides with number one, is that once you know how to use the piece of equipment, you got to make sure you have proper form, because there are a lot of nuances when you lift, but more in particular with free weights as opposed to machine assisted, such as when you're squatting, sometimes you have too much weight up, you might be leaning too much forward, leaning too much back. If you're doing deadlifts, you might be bending too low. If you're doing shoulder press, dumbbell inclines, you might be pulling your shoulders too back. There's all sorts of things. If you're doing the flat bench, your grip might be too much this way, which is putting too much pressure on your wrists. So there are a lot of little things that people that don't are not cognizant about, that it can cause a lot of trouble, so be careful with that. The third piece of advice is that if you are lifting pretty heavy and or you're trying to like set a PR or you're trying to max out, I definitely would recommend a spotter. Now, I don't use a spotter, but if I'm, let's say, trying to max out like I just mentioned, and or I know I'm really fatigued on that last set, then I will ask somebody to spot me. So leave your ego out the door, and be sure that if you are lifting a good amount of weight and you're not sure you can get that last repetition up, that you get a spotter. The other good reason why having a spotter is good is that, when you get that one repetition, I call it the point of no return. Let's say on the flat bench, you do it and you go up, right? And you're pretty weak, but you feel like you could maybe do one more and you're like 50-50. That's where the spotter is the most valuable, in my opinion. Now, like I said, I don't use a spotter very often, but a lot of times when you're at that point where it's 50-50 and you're like, should I do one more repetition? A lot of times, if I don't have a spotter, I'll just re-rack the weight because I don't want to get stuck. And actually, it has happened to me before, but I'm experienced enough to know how to get out of that situation, but don't get caught in that predicament. The other piece of advice I want to give you is that gym safety doesn't only apply to lifting weights, it actually applies to cardio. Some of you guys and gals might be saying to yourself, how's that possible? Well, I'll tell you right now. Let's use a treadmill as an example. And this was kind of a complaint I had at my gym, but they finally got new treadmills. When you go on the treadmill, the first thing you want to do is, when you step on it, there's obviously handles on the side. Put both hands on the handles and see if you can shake the treadmill and move it side to side. If it's wobbling around like this and it's moving constantly, it needs to be retightened. And I had this complaint before, and the people at my gym finally got new ones. But that's actually a hazard that can that shouldn't happen, but some people at the gym are lazy or whatever, they're just not on top of it. So if you shake that treadmill and it's moving like crazy, or you're running and it's rattling, it's making big noise, go to another treadmill that's more stable. The other thing I wanted to mention about the treadmill is after you find a treadmill that is pretty stable, all treadmills should have an emergency button. It's like a little cord, and it's usually red, and it's hooked up right on the below the area of the display panel where it has your miles, you know, your time. And before you get on the treadmill, as soon as you turn it on, grab that emergency handle and pull it off and test it out and to make sure that it should stop, because you never know. A lot of times you're running really hard, you're really tired, and if that emergency handle doesn't come off, you could be in trouble. Now granted, you could probably press stop and it will stop, but it's always good to know that you have the emergency handle, because a lot of times you're running really hard and you want to hit stop, but the stop button's so small with all these numbers and you can't see it, and you're like, what the heck, what do I do? And you might fall off. But if the emergency handle is there and you're completely winded, you can just grab that cord and just pull it, and you don't have to worry about trying to find it between numbers 1 through 9 and the miles, kilograms, weights, etc., etc. The last piece of advice I want to give you is, this probably doesn't pertain to everybody, not to me, not yet, but I don't recommend you guys lifting weights, especially free weights, with alone or nobody within proximity. Now, a lot of people don't have home gyms. I don't have one, but I know there's some people that, you know, my buddy had like a flat bench in his garage. See a lot of guys like that. They like to lift weights by themselves. If you know what you're doing, for the most part, you're going to be okay. But if you're lifting some serious weight, it's pretty risky, especially with like the bench press, for example. Now, you know, a lot of times you're going to be okay doing it, but who knows? What if you get a muscle cramp or involuntary contraction or something? Can happen. In the past, it's happened to me before, but I've actually gotten a cramp in my hand. Now, it didn't happen while I was bench pressing, but I actually cramped up in my hand. And who's to say that that won't happen while you're lifting a serious amount of weight? If it gets caught on your chest, it's over, you know, and you don't want to risk that. So I do recommend having at least somebody around when you're lifting weights. And, you know, also, you know, some gyms, like the 24-hour fitness, they're open obviously 24 hours. That's really good. It caters to people with that work, let's say, weird hours. They work the night times, and they might work out at like midnight. And in that situation, if you're working out, there might not be as many people at the gym, but I would definitely, you know, give somebody a heads up that, you know, I'm going to be lifting this weight and I might need a spotter, or keep an eye out on me just in case. Okay, that about wraps it up. I hope that video was very informative. Please, everybody, be safe, be careful, because you don't want to end up like that guy that I just saw a week ago where he had a big gash on his forehead. I felt really bad for the guy. Fortunately, it wasn't nothing too serious. I hope not, because I did see him walk away just with the bandage. But anyway, thank you again for watching another video, and I'll see you guys next time.